I currently work with the ESA team as a peer support specialist for both Washington County and Clackamas County in Oregon. And yeah, that's my overview. I've been doing peer support for about 3 years now.
Thank you, Connor.
Glad to be here. Thanks, Andrew.
Glad to have you.
Hearing no one else talk, I'll go ahead and jump on. My name is Jamila Weeks. I'm family support specialist with Kairos Coastline down in Coos Bay, right on the beach, almost. And parent to 6 now grown children who have all been involved in mental health services. And I've been doing family support for about, here at this building, about 3 years, but quite a bit before that, just not so formally.
Wonderful. I think we can do probably one more person.
Okay, so I'm Gina Briggs. I'm a parent mentor for Morrison Child and Family Services in Washington County. I work with all populations of people, mental health, addiction, people with not mental health addictions, just all types of people. So I'm just here to learn.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you guys for sharing. And also thank you for everyone who put something in the chat. So I will go ahead and introduce myself since we're 5 minutes in, and just tell you a little bit about me and why I chose to do this workshop. So my name is Andrew Pegram. I have been working in peer support for close to 3 years now. I've been working at the Hawthorne Watkins Center, working in crisis. And I first got certified in peer support probably 3 years ago, roughly. So what drove me to do this topic in particular is because on the one hand, I've just always been fascinated with human consciousness, with different experiences around the world of what consciousness is, what reality is, what is this thing that is called life that we all navigate, and just how different cultures have different interpretations of that. And it was really fascinating to me to compare that cross-cultural lens with how our modern Western psychiatric system sees consciousness, and in particular states of mental health. In a lot of ways, they're at odd ends and they don't always agree. And I just think it's important to have different perspectives on mental health states, and seeing it as not just an experience of pathology necessarily, but as part of the diversity of who we are as human beings. So on a personal level, for several years, I've had different experiences with unusual experiences. Just to give you a few things, I used to be a paranormal investigator. I've had experiences of interacting with spirits, being touched, seeing shadow figures, seeing lights. I've had a lot of weird experiences. Most of the time I've chased them intentionally. Last year, I went through a very challenging depression and sort of an existential crisis, and ended up going on FMLA for a few weeks. In that experience, I actually went on a really intensive journey, both inner and outer, and had some altered states, some of which that were precipitated in I'll just say a ceremonial context, and some of which came up on their own after that. And all of those experiences were just extremely revealing and powerful. And I'm still digesting them. I'm still understanding the meaning of those experiences, but they helped me get out of my depression, essentially. And not that I'm completely out of it, not that I haven't had waves of it, I'm still battling it, but it helped me find a new perspective on my life and want to actually pursue my life. So this is a topic I've been wanting to do actually for over a year now, but it feels particularly relevant for me to do it now in light of those experiences. And I think it's important too, as more people are becoming aware of the need to see the impact of culture, to understand diversity. You know, a lot of people are talking about diversity. Um, I think this is an area where it's typically lacking as far as mental health. I think we forget the diversity of consciousness itself. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
And real
This
quick,
is also
let me interject. Sorry, Andrew. Let me interject
Sure.
real quick. Just a couple of housekeeping items. I just want to let you all know that we are recording. If you do not want to be recorded, please feel free to turn off your camera, change your name, whatever you feel most comfortable with. Secondly, we have closed captioning, so you might see it appear on your screen. And then lastly, in terms of questions, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot them in the chat box, or we have a couple of reactions available to you, and we'll just go along with it. So that was all I needed to say. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you. And this is my first time doing something like this on this kind of scale. So forgive me if I mess up some things, but I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen. Oh, it says host participant. Oh, host disabled participant screen sharing. Awesome. All right. Here we go. Okay, supporting altered states. So I just want to make a quick comment. Some of this material, if it brings up anything for you, if it triggers anything, feel free to share it in the chat, or if you feel like you need to take a break, definitely do what you need for yourself. I did my best to make this as inclusive as possible, to not make it as triggering as it could be. But there might be some parts where there's kind of an invitation to reconsider some ideas or think about things in a new way. And I just like to consider this like the stretch zone. It's where we kind of get out of our comfort zone for a moment and just test the waters, test our ideas. But if you feel like something is coming up for you that is strongly triggering, definitely do what you need to do for yourself to either step away for a moment or let one of us know. Okay, so some of our core intentions with this workshop. I distilled it down to 4 main things. 1, understand altered states from a broad perspective. 2, explore how consciousness can express itself in unique ways. 3, consider the impact of culture and worldview on our experiences. And 4, access the inherent adaptability of the mind as a resource. And later on in the workshop, we'll be getting into much more interactive, practical things to do, some creative, fun things. And then some parts of this are going to have a more cultural lens to it. I am actually hoping to do a future workshop that's more intensive and a lot longer than this. So would love any feedback too at the end of this of more things that you want to see. Some things I wanted to go more in depth into, but just don't really have the time for it today. But I definitely want to follow up with this for sure. And I feel like this quote just beautifully captures the whole meaning of this presentation. It's by Frank Herbert, who wrote Dune. A process cannot be understood by stopping it. Understanding must move with the flow of the process, must join it and flow with it. So I wanted to share with you this really just amazing video of this woman's transformation. Her name is Zakaya. And this video was featured in the documentary Crazy Wise, which I highly recommend. And it really illustrates well her experience of altered states, and also how embracing her culture, or the culture that she felt could help her through this process, just really gave her strength.
This is, in kindergarten. And although I'm smiling, in my eyes I see sadness, because this is around the time when my father started molesting me. So it's a bittersweet picture. I was always quiet and isolated. Half the time, and the other time I was very angry. So I remember one time I was on the school bus and there was a child being picked on, and I attacked the other child that was the bully to stand up for the kid, because I wanted someone to do that for me. My life was just really rock bottom. I hit rock bottom. I dealt with depression for a huge part of my life. I decided I did not know why I was living on this earth. I had no clue. I didn't feel deserving of love, of anything. Then I started to have intense visions. I started to see my deceased father, and he would show up in my room. And really, it was the scariest thing that I've ever experienced. And I could feel it. I could feel him first, and then I would just see him appear. I decided to try to get some kind of help. And there was a hospital near me, New York Presbyterian Hospital. And I remember going into the emergency room and telling them exactly what I had been experiencing. And they admitted me into the hospital. I was put on several different medications, about 4 or 5 different really heavy drugs, antipsychotics, and it really changed who I was completely. I had gained 70 pounds in the first 2.5 months of being on the medications. Feel like, okay, finally, I know why I'm on this earth. I know why I'm so sensitive to all these things and energies. I understand why I have visions now. I understand, and I had to go find it. You tell your therapist or your psychiatrist and they say you're ill. They say you have an issue. You have borderline personality disorder. You have chronic depression. And these are the drugs that you need to take. This is what's going to help you. But nobody told me this is a spiritual matter. And you are gifted. And now it's time for you to hone these gifts. And it was just so amazing. I'm so grateful because it has changed my life. I know who I am without a doubt, 100%. I know who I am. And it is the best feeling ever. I have a purpose and I have a reason to live. And the reason is the best reason that God could ever give, is to help humanity, help other people that have experienced the things that I have experienced, to connect with Earth, to connect with this universe. It is magical. And I am so grateful.
Man, it just summarizes this whole thing so well, I think. So what are altered states? So the way I'm using the term altered state here is basically just a change in consciousness. And some related terms that you might hear, they're not all necessarily equivalent, but definitely connected. Non-ordinary state, peak experience, spiritual emergency, sometimes called spiritual emergence, transpersonal crisis, and extreme state. Another reason that I created this workshop is because I've noticed that oftentimes as supporters, we might come across someone who's in a different experience of reality. They might be seeing or hearing something that we're not experiencing personally. They might be communicating in a way that just is so different from the way we communicate. It might not be linear. It might not be quote unquote logical. And so sometimes it can feel like there's this gulf between us and them, that they're experiencing something that we're not, and we don't know how to communicate with them. Part of this presentation is hopefully to give you some ideas and tools to maybe bridge this gulf a little bit. It's hard to bridge it completely sometimes, but to have a little bit more flexibility in how we can approach people. So borrowing this from my friend John Harold, and I believe this is something that originally came from the Process Work Institute. This, it's called the cone model, the ice cream cone. And there are these three sort of dimensions of experience, two main ones. Consensual experience, that's at this very top, that's the widest. And it's basically the experience most of us can agree on. It's the ordinary world, quote unquote. It's daily life, going to work, all these kinds of things. It's how we function. At the very bottom of this, with this sort of apex, inverted apex, is the non-dual experience that has so many different names: transpersonal. People can describe it as oneness, connection, feeling like everything is not real, feeling like there's emptiness, the void. There have been so many names, so many cultures have given this, but it usually comes down to this point of experience that just transcends any kind of words we can give it. And then in between these two extremes are really just this rich diversity of experiences we can have. We can hear voices, we can see things, we can feel things. It's rich. And this is just a little movie clip I thought would illustrate the bottom portion of this cone.
Okay, let's get started.
Is this part of my investigation?
Yes. Say this blanket represents all the matter and energy in the universe, okay? You, me, everything. Nothing has been left out, all right? All the particles, everything.
What's outside this blanket?
More blankets, that's the point.
Blanket's everything.
Exactly. This is everything, okay? Let's just say that this is me, right? And I'm, what, 60-odd years old, and I'm wearing a gray suit, blah, blah, blah. And let's say over here, this is you, and you're, I don't know, you're 21, you've got dark hair, etc. And over here, this is Vivian, my wife and colleague. And then over here, this is the Eiffel Tower, right? It's Paris. And this is a war, and this is a museum, and this is a disease, and this is an orgasm, and this is a hamburger.
Everything is the same, even if it's different.
Exactly. But our everyday mind forgets this. We think everything is separate, limited. I'm over here, you're over there, which is true, but it's not the whole truth, because we're all connected. Because we are connected.
Sure.
Okay?
Yeah.
All right, now, we need to learn how to see the blanket truth all the time, right in the everyday stuff. And that's what this is for.
Why?
Why what?
Why do I need to learn how to see the blanket thing all the time in the everyday stuff?
Well, you wouldn't want to miss out on the big picture, would you?
Uh-uh.
That's partly why you're here, right? And this is it. I'm talking about it right now. I mean, it'll take a while for you to get it, you know? But it'll help you.
How?
When you get the blanket thing, you can relax because everything you could ever want or be, you already have and are. That sound pretty good?
Sounds very good.
All right, get in.
You want me to get in?
Mm-hmm.
So get in here?
Yeah.
What's gonna happen to me in there?
Okay, you're gonna see. You'll find out.
All right, so yeah, I think one way to think about this, we might be working with someone or helping someone out and consider that they're stuck where they are, like they're in this other reality, and they're not able to join ours, that they're not able to function in this one. And so we might say, oh yeah, they're stuck where they are. I don't think we always consider, are we stuck where we are? Sure, we're functioning, maybe. Sure, we're going about our daily lives. But are we able to experience what's outside that? And most of us think that this so-called physical world is all there is, that there isn't anything outside that. I think that's the blessing of people who have these altered experiences, because they show us that, oh, maybe there is more. Another way I like to think about this is, in one sense, considering that there's something called a conditioned state. This is basically everything that influences us: culture, parents, media, peers, school, all the things that go into creating our worldviews, our belief systems, how we function in this reality. Sometimes, though, things happen and we get thrown out of this conditioned state towards more of an unconditioned state. And that's sometimes a very messy process. It's not even black and white. But when we start to move out of what we've known, what's familiar, it can usually either be very terrifying, and sometimes it can be extremely blissful. In my case, I had an experience towards the end of last year where it was extremely terrifying and it was extremely blissful once I moved through it. So a lot of people have actually had some kind of non-ordinary experience. So 49% of the US population, this was as of 2009. I don't think they've had a more recent survey yet, but 49% have had either a religious or a mystical experience that in this context was beyond an ordinary state of mind. And at least 10% of people, is estimated, have had voices come into their minds at some point in their lives. So altered states, I think, can be looked at in a lot of different ways. I'm just going to start with a lot of common altered states that most of us have had some kind of experience with, but we might not really consider it an altered state. So dreaming, all of us dream, even if we don't remember. Hypnagogic states, that's pretty much when we're half awake or half asleep. Arousal and sex. And I bring that up because sometimes when we're in a very strongly aroused state, we might do things we wouldn't normally do in an ordinary state. Falling in love, that can be a very powerful altered state for some people. We also might not do things we would do in an ordinary state. Giving birth, grief, daydreaming, an immersion in a book, movie, show. And I bring this up because if you've ever been in a horror film and you get so into it that moment when something pops out or the killer comes out, like your body physically responds to it, you tighten up, you feel this rush of adrenaline, all these things are happening inside you. You are responding almost as if it was a real event, but you're just watching it on the screen. This happens a lot. This happens when we're reading a really great book and maybe a character dies that we love, and then we start crying. We feel so sad. You might say it's not, quote unquote, really happening, but we're still responding as if it is actually happening. Childhood is probably the most common altered state that all of us have experienced. And think about a child when they're going through life. You know, they might have an imaginary friend. They tend to be highly creative, seeing things in a different way. They are so enraptured with curiosity, exploring life, just fascinated by it. Sometimes the smallest things that we would consider having no value. And sometimes we kind of look down on that, or we forget that, and we prioritize being an adult. It doesn't mean we don't have access to those states of mind anymore or those resources. If anyone has done inner child work, this is a really powerful way to get back in touch with that. We just forget it because we decide other things are more important. I think sometimes when we're working with people who are going through unusual experiences, it can be helpful for us to remember that we have these parts of ourselves, these creative, these intuitive sides that are so well embodied in children. And all we have to do is sometimes even remember what that's like to be a playful child and call that back up in the moment and let loose. So some semi-common altered states: near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, sleep deprivation, sensory deprivation or isolation, extrasensory perception, religious experiences and rites of passage, fasting, and psychedelic experiences. So I wanted to bring up the term psychosis in the sense of how it's commonly used and framing it within this context. In our system in the West, some researchers like Stanislav Grof have proposed that a lot of these non-ordinary experiences tend to get classified under psychosis, under this pathological umbrella. But part of the reason for that is because we don't really have cultural references outside of this medical model. We don't have any kind of traditions that acknowledge these altered states as being real or being useful. And because of that, they just tend to all get lumped together under this one term. And also as a result of that, there tends to be this one pathway for treatment and recovery that is supposed to be provided to all people with these experiences. But that's not always useful. And so more and more researchers, I think, are starting to question this what I think is an outdated model and considering other perspectives. And it's still taking time to catch up, but I think we're going to see more of these new ways of thinking probably in the coming years. I think a really great way to look at these types of states is to compare them with the psychedelic experience. And Oregon, within the next couple of years, is going to start seeing, for example, psilocybin-assisted therapy come out. And so we're going to be confronted really quickly with these altered states of consciousness. And I think that's going to provide a lot of room for us to explore what is consciousness, what is reality, and to question these things more. And I think it's going to give some room for us to move outside of the traditional model. So some similarities between psychedelic experiences and psychosis: changes in perception, shift in sense of self, augmented feelings, symbolic or archetypal content, sometimes mythical content, new ideas or beliefs, resurfacing of trauma, and unpredictable content. So none of this is black or white. This is just a very generalized perspective, but it just gives some idea of like, these are some things that might be in common and some differences. So with psychedelic experiences, you have the opportunity to make it intentional. Usually, not always, but usually the duration is based on a substance. If you're doing this in an intentional way, you have the opportunity to do it in an accepting space where people tend to understand it. There's often meaning and importance attached to it, so much so that many people actually chase these experiences and want to have them. There's a preparation phase, and not everyone prepares, but again, there's that opportunity available. And because there's preparation, you can come into it with the right mindset, you can create the right atmosphere for it, invite the right people. And there's integration too after the fact, which basically means, what do you want to take away from that experience, and how do you want it to affect your life? What do you want to do with your life now? With psychosis, it's usually unexpected. The timeline for how long it lasts is unclear. Because of these factors and some other factors, it usually occurs in a fearful space or an anxious space where people don't understand it. And also because of some of these factors, it's typically pathologized. You're unable to prepare. And usually the course of treatment is symptom suppression. I just want to make a disclaimer too. None of this information is to diagnose, treat, or prevent any kind of condition. It's not meant to be a replacement for any kind of treatment, but just ideas to consider. So in the 50s, they actually used LSD to model what they considered psychosis. And I wanted to show this video because it's a great example of someone exploring this altered state as it's occurring in real time, and a researcher who is asking some questions to clarify that experience more. And even though this isn't a research setting, I think it has some great examples of some ways that we can approach altered states.
137. By now he loses the feeling that his body has substance. He ate his last meal 20 hours ago, but food holds no interest for him.
Very fine, and of course I don't think you can take much credence to what I say, because it's, the shifting patterns of things I feel and see around me are, I do not know what part of what reality, again. This feeling comes over me of almost like the singing, you know, of angels or something. I think it's the soundtrack or the film going through the machine.
Which makes you feel as if you were hearing the singing of angels.
Yes, and murmuring.
I see. You had no breakfast, you said?
No.
Well, suppose that we serve you something to eat now, because you've been fasting long enough. So, Mr. Manta, would you bring in the lunch?
Well, I really, you know, I couldn't eat that.
Why is that?
It seems repugnant and realistic.
Well, you told me not long ago that you were hungry.
What I'm hungry for is not this sort of thing, because I want to feed off of this feeling, this joy, which seems to be coming from everything. But somehow I don't seem like I myself. I feel as though I'm several other people, and all of them better. And all very benevolent. I mean, even I feel about that I'm not being I'm not describing the word benevolence the way I mean it.
Well, returning back to the lunch,
yes.
You don't feel at all like eating at all?
No, not at all.
How about drinking something? You might be a little
No,
thirsty.
I feel that I'm perfectly adequate. I mean, I can take care of myself from now on. I have no hunger. My sensation is perfect. I mean, it's just a wonderful state.
But I understand that you had nothing to eat. Now it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and you had nothing to eat since last night when you had your dinner. Don't you think it's about time to eat something? Or drink
Well, I
something?
generally don't eat in the mornings. And
Well, this is no longer the morning. This is already 1 p.m.
Well, it might be. Maybe I should be
Why don't
hungry.
you just taste it, and maybe you will like it. Why don't you just take a stab at it and just taste at least this malted milk that we give you?
Well, when you're in such a wonderful situation, why should you try to improve it?
Well, you told me just a few minutes ago that you were thirsty. How come that you don't feel like eating at this time?
I know, but I can see the value of that, but you don't understand the value of the experience itself. You want to have it continue.
Oh, I see. In other words, our conflict is that I want to limit this, and you want this
And
to
I want to have it
continue
go
and
on.
and on and on and on.
Yes.
Well, suppose you just taste this malted milk here, just to give me an idea whether you have any particular distortion in sensation.
I see what you mean, yes. You want to experiment.
Well, I want to know whether there's any particular feeling connected with it.
It's the same distortion you get throughout the whole experience.
Such as what?
Well, lopsided. And you don't seem to be feeling it with your whole body. You seem to be feeling it with a horn-likeness. Things seem to be apexing in. I seem to be listening to myself and being you, the audience, listening to me.
What about the taste? Does it taste like the anticipated taste of a chocolate malt?
Yes, it does. All those things are so well known that there's no sense in doing them. I mean, the fact that I would never eat a hamburger again because it's so vulgar. You've had a hamburger.
What would you like to eat if you had a choice?
Well, what I would like to eat? Nothing. I have no, I feel physical again, and I think this is a bad thing.
You prefer to feel
that joy which gives me a feeling of anxiety, but at the same time...
Why does it give you a feeling of anxiety?
Because it seems to want to take me over too much, you see, and I don't want to let myself go.
Do you think that it can happen that you let yourself go and...
It seems so ecstatic and perfect that perhaps I can, and I don't want to suffer the consequences.
What would be the consequence?
That's an interesting question.
Well, let me reassure you right now that tonight you are going to go home, eat your dinner, and you will look back upon this experience. You will perfectly, all right, your same old self, and in a few hours, this whole feeling will leave.
So I think that video is a great example too of when someone doesn't seem to be quote unquote functioning in our reality. Like this man, he didn't want to eat. And sometimes it can be about wanting to, it's not necessarily, sometimes it can be about wanting to have a different experience than we might consider valuable. And so instead of necessarily saying, oh, you should eat, or oh, you need to do this to survive, it can be about exploring what that means to them. Like, why don't they want to eat? What do they want actually? And when they're in this state, reality is just so different. Things can take on symbolic value. Things can mean dramatically different things, and they might be having a really intense experience of, like, say, oneness or connection. Like he was saying, he said he felt he was the audience experiencing him. So eating means something totally different to him now. And so I'll just open the floor for probably a couple people if you want to share. What was a positive, life-changing altered state you've experienced?
I would actually love to share one if that's all right.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah, so I grew up very not religious and not believing in any sort of higher power, and that caused a lot of existential dread for me. So having depression and anxiety, it was really hard when those things would come about because I didn't have anything to look to. You know, there's no meaning whatsoever. However, that really bothered me, and so I started exploring what sort of spiritual paths felt right and felt like they clicked. And I ended up exploring Wicca and like nature-based religions. But it's still like I can't force myself to believe in some god or goddess, you know, it has to come to me. And there was a time where I was experiencing that existential dread, and I just remember I was crying in my bed so hard that I was like heaving and I couldn't breathe, and like my stomach was spasming so hard like I was going to throw up. It was just the worst experience, and I felt this really warm, comforting hand on my back. And to this day, I haven't had an experience like that again. both the existential, I mean, I have existential dread still, but not that bad. And I haven't felt that again. But in my mind at the time, I thought, okay, that's the Wiccan goddess saying I've chosen the right path. This is for me. And I just remember this like feeling of warmth spread from my head to my toes. And it was like I was encompassed in this blanket of just comfort and kindness and feeling like things are going to be okay. And it just stopped. Like I just stopped crying. I stopped heaving. I was able to breathe again. So I have no idea what that was, but that is the most profound sort of altered state I've ever experienced.
Wow, thank you for sharing that, Amaya. And we have time for one more if someone wants to share too.
I think that for me, it's always been spiritual situations. And it's hard for me to explain it, but I felt really guilty about something that I had done. And it was so shameful to me that I carried it on. And I was on LSD, and I went to different relatives in my altered state, and I said, help me, you know, I'm not going to be able to be forgiven for what I've done right now. And everybody that I went to said, you're right, you're an awful person, and we don't even want you around us anymore. And it was very sad, you know. It's like, oh my gosh. And I went to the people that I thought would accept me the most, and they didn't. And after the last one, I can remember vividly walking down this gravel road, and it was foggy, but at the end of the gravel road was my impression of who Jesus Christ is. And I looked at him and I said, I've been everywhere to get forgiveness and to be accepted, and nobody will accept me. And since you're God, I guess that was my last chance. And his response was not rejection. His response was very much loving. And he opened his arms and put his arms around me. And, you know, that was like ecstasy for me. Like I thought I did something that I could never be forgiven for. And he showed me that he loved me no matter who I am, where I go, what I think, what I do. And that was amazing to me.
Thank you. Thank you both for sharing that.
Hey, Andrew, there was a couple of questions in the chat earlier in regards to the video you had sent, or you had, I think it was Melissa that had asked a question, Lauren, regards to, do you want to chime in? Because there was a couple of questions here, conversation.
So you said Melissa was the first one?
Melissa Palmer.
I'm scrolling through. There are a lot of messages.
There's a lot of conversation going on.
Yeah, I apologize to anyone who was trying to ask.
In regards to microdosing with the psilocybin that you had mentioned. So her question was, will microdosing will it have a true psychedelic experience?
Oh, so I cannot answer that question, unfortunately. But I would like to make a statement about altered states in general, and you know what is true and what's not. So my experience has been, I've had very similar experiences both on, I'll just say, certain psychedelics and off those as well, and there have been a lot of similarities. End of last year, I did something called bufo, which is, it's a really concentrated form of DMT that comes from a toad. and it's extremely powerful. And after having that experience, I actually had several altered states that I went into just on their own. And part of that I feel can be related to where you are in your life and like what your state of mind is. I was in this state of really like intensely trying to question things and get to the root of it and trying to understand myself. And I think that's part of what might have helped trigger the states after the fact. So I can't speak specifically for microdosing, but I think in general, your intention is so important to it. And if you're placing the intention, like, I want to take this to help myself heal, and you define what that healing looks like for you, I think that can be an important part of that process. I can't speak for like medically, like how that might impact you. And Jacqueline, did you say there was another question too?
Oh, it looks like Lauren had her question answered, so you can
Oh,
go.
awesome. Awesome. Thanks everyone for sharing. I wish I could do a whole all day thing. I could talk about this stuff forever. We have a few more things to get to, but yeah, thank you so much for just sharing your experiences and asking questions. All right, I'm gonna share the screen again. So worldview. I believe that you believe that. Some of us may have said this in our lives, or some of us may have heard this from someone else, but there's this term called metaphysical skepticism. And it's basically how that comes in practice is, if someone has an experience that you don't believe in, instead of exploring that experience, you shut yourself off to it completely. This is a simplified way of explaining it, but gets the point across. And we might say, oh yeah, I believe that, you believe that, but we've already created a wall between us. We've already decided, like, my beliefs are what they are and nothing's going to change that, and your beliefs are not going to affect that in any kind of way. And in a way that can be our way to try to maintain our integrity, and we don't want to lose that. But sometimes that can also delegitimize and invalidate their experiences. And even if we're very sweet about it, very nice, like, oh, that's so cool that you said that, if we keep the process strictly on this is their experience and it has no impact on me, then that just adds to the gulf. So in a lot of different cultures around the world, they have terms like shaman, medicine person, curandero, so many different terms. But usually there's at least one person in these different communities who has experience going in and out of altered states. And they do so in a very skilled way. But when they go into these states, usually they'll bring back some kind of knowledge, information, wisdom, healing that benefits the community. And it's in the context of respect. It's in the context of mutual appreciation. In our society, we don't have very much in the light of that. The closest thing we have as a parallel is maybe a genius, inventor, maybe revolutionary artist, the Beatles, Nikola Tesla, those kinds of people. And it's still relevant. I mean, a lot of these people actually had altered states. Nikola Tesla, he saw visions. And the Beatles, they took LSD. So even in those cases, you know, they've had altered states that impacted their work. But we don't like to talk about that. As far as someone who just goes in an altered state and they don't have any of that kind of credibility, they don't have the word scientist or musician to attach to their name, it's easy for them to be pathologized and to be rejected or ignored. And so we don't really value what they have to say, especially if it is in dramatic contrast to our beliefs, our worldview. And I think some really great questions that all of us could be asking ourselves is, what is true? How do I know that? Who am I? Like, who am I really? Who am I that's beyond the name? Who am I that's beyond the title? That's beyond all of these things that people have told me I am? And what is this? When we don't label anything, what is this? What is experience? What is life? What is this? So when we're meeting someone who's in an altered state, something I think that's a really useful model for paying attention to, it comes from the philosopher Hegel, and it's this idea of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So two forces or ideas coming together, and instead of just opposing each other, something new and beautiful is born out of that, synthesis of that. And so let's say someone's coming to us and they're having an experience, they're having a really deeply religious experience, and they're seeing God, how they define God. And we don't have that same belief. Now, we don't necessarily have to accept their interpretation of that, or we don't have to accept their experience as real for us. And at the same time, it also presents the opportunity for us to question our beliefs. And that's a hard thing. That's biologically a hard thing for us to do, because ideas that are considered a threat to our worldview are actually perceived as physical threats. We will respond to them with fight or flight. That's a biological response. And so it's important for us to be aware of what comes up when we are presented with a contradictory belief. Are we tightening up? Are we getting anxious? Are we angry? Are we upset? Like, what's going on inside us? It's important to take a moment to check in. And then with that, to consider, is there anything about this experience that I could agree with? Or is there anything I can think about and question? How does this relate to my worldview? How does this relate to my beliefs about reality and myself? And when we can be open and honest with that, also with the other person, it might help them to even question what's going on in their own way. And then this synthesis can come through that encourages both of us to see things in a new way. So there's a study that came out actually this year. It was a collaboration between anthropology and psychology, and they studied 5 countries around the world with different cultural beliefs and religions and worldviews. This happened over the past 3 years. And what they identified is that there are 2 main factors that seem to influence people having non-ordinary experiences. In this context, usually with hearing voices and seeing visions. So the first one of these qualities that influences it is something called porosity. So that's a worldview that things are interconnected, that we are not that separate. Even our emotions aren't that separate. Maybe our thoughts aren't that separate. Things are so interconnected. We live in this living ecosystem, or this whole, or this oneness. Different cultures have different way of looking at it. But if there's that worldview of interconnection, that can influence having these non-ordinary experiences. The second quality is absorption, which is the trait of immersion. So that's essentially very similar to when you're really immersed in a book or a movie and you're just so tuned in that everything else doesn't matter. You're responding to it as if it was real. You're crying when someone dies. You're freaking out when a scary moment happens. But this is that in a very powerful way. It's a powerful imagination. And so when someone has these 2 qualities together, they are much more prone to experience voices and visions and other non-ordinary states. Now, this study doesn't have any metaphysical or existential conclusions about that. These are just the psychological and cultural factors that influence them, whether someone is even open to these experiences. So it's important to consider, what are your beliefs about reality? How did you get those beliefs? What do they mean to you? And before I move further, I'll take maybe one or two questions.
Yeah, we've got a question in the chat from Crystal. I am sitting here wondering why I haven't tried to draw on my altered state experiences to help heal myself today and process and handle life. They had to have happened for a reason. Who can I reach out that might be able to help me explore this?
Wow, thank you, Crystal. Yeah, towards the end of this presentation, I'll actually share a few resources that things that I've found helpful and things that have helped me learn. And at the end of it, maybe we can also have a brief discussion about, like, if anyone wants to share resources that have helped them, you know, I can maybe open the room for that. Great question, really great question.
I also saw 2 hands up, they went down. I think it was one from Gregory, another one from Jim. So if you two have any questions or comments, please feel free.
Okay, I did, and it's going back to the use of psychedelics or what have you to treat mental health and substance abuse. I was thinking about a fellow I knew in Seattle, and this was back in the 2000s. And he was a heroin addict, and he had tried every known means to get clean. You know, treatment, multiple treatment centers, 12-step meetings, so forth and so on. And finally, a friend of mine and some other people I know up there, and I don't know how they arranged it, I wasn't involved in it, for him to go to Peru and spend a little more than 2 weeks down there with the indigenous people in the Amazon in an ayahuasca ceremony. And that's a pretty rigorous thing if you know anything about it. Not only is ayahuasca psychoactive, but it's a purgative. I mean, your body violently purges itself of toxins, and it's pretty rigorous, but it's all under the guidance of people who know what they're doing. And anyway, all I know is, and he couldn't really describe his experience, but he came back changed. And like I said, this was probably 2004, 2005, and he hasn't used since. So I do know about, you know, I know somebody personally that had some kind of experience with what we're talking about here that altered not only their perception of consciousness or their consciousness, but in a way that enables them to live in a way that they don't have to use heroin anymore.
Yeah,
I just wanted to share that.
That's beautiful. Yeah, some of the studies that I've looked at so far indicate that it's the experience itself, like you might say the transpersonal, the quote unquote spiritual dimensions of that experience that contribute to the healing. And they're still trying to understand it. That's not the final word on it, but that's the hypothesis that's coming out right now in the research. So I think to me it shows that these experiences, whether they're from a substance or whether they come up on their own, they can be hugely healing and transformative. And
hey, Andrew.
Oh yeah.
I just wanted to speak on you bringing up the transpersonal stuff. I'm so refreshed by you presenting this information. A few years ago, I got involved with the Graf transpersonal training program, Stanislav Graf's program. And I went to Joshua Tree to actually study spiritual emergency with them. And while I was down there, I was doing some holotropic breathwork sessions. I don't know how much you know about holotropic breathwork, but it does create a non-ordinary state of consciousness with just the use of your breath alone, no drugs. And all different types
Yeah.
of things came up for me in that session. I'm getting chills now talking about it. But all different types of traumas I experienced in my life came to the surface and they were able to be processed. I got visions of things that didn't make sense to me until now. And this was almost like 4 years ago. But now all of these things are playing out and I'm a more whole version of myself. And these non-ordinary states, yes, psychedelic experiences can induce them. Breath work can induce them, but they lead us to more whole aspects of ourselves. And Stanislav Grof's paradigm of spiritual emergency is so enlightening for anybody who is curious about that. There are different types of spiritual emergencies, and I'm sure Andrew may touch on that. But I'm so refreshed by this. I've gone through a shamanic crisis. I've gone through psychological renewal, and altered states helped me see my way through all of that.
Yeah. I highly recommend for anyone who's interested in this topic to explore Stanislav Grof and his wife Christina. They published a journal article that came out a few years ago, actually on spiritual emergency, and I think I reference it in my references at the end of this. But yeah, feel free to definitely explore that. I also will be sharing a breathwork, an online breathwork resource that's it's really affordable. It's like, I think, $50 a month, and you get unlimited access online to breathwork. So if anyone who's interested in that, I can share that. But yeah, thank you, Gregory, for sharing. I just want to I think I might jump to some of the interactive stuff since we're kind of coming up on time here. I want to make sure that we do that. And if we have time, we'll come back to this video maybe. Okay, so accessing the other side. So it can be really helpful when we're supporting someone or even communicating with someone who's in an altered state to remember to call on the creative parts of ourselves, the intuitive, playful, spacious parts of ourselves. Sometimes even just recognizing like we all have an inner child and remembering to access that part of ourselves that's childlike. That can accompany us as an adult with all the resources we have as an adult, while bringing these additional resources. So these are just going to be a few exercises to play with some of this stuff. So the first thing I want to do is something called presence. Similar to mindfulness, but if you have any ideas or preconceptions about mindfulness, I ask that you just kind of set that aside for the moment. And we'll just dive into it. So get into a comfortable position. Take a few deep, slow breaths in and out. As you get in touch with your body, and notice how you're feeling right now in this moment. Now imagine that there's a weight attached to everything that you define yourself with. All the things that make up who you seem to be as a person. Your name, your history, your education, your work title, all these different things. And just imagine for a second that all of these things are able to simply fall to the floor. And you simply notice the sense of I am. Maybe say to yourself, out loud or in your mind, I am. And notice the feeling that comes up. Be aware of your awareness. And relax into that. And maybe even notice that your awareness is always present. That it can never go away. So this is a really, I think, key place to come into when we feel stressed or we feel like we're having a hard time connecting. It's a great place to sink back into, being aware of your awareness. Sometimes this is all you need to. When you're holding space, if you can hold this presence, the other person can feel it too. All right. And I'd like you to, to continue feeling in touch with this as we move to the next exercise, which is free association. So with this exercise, I'm going to be bringing up a lot of seemingly random things, but just go with the first thoughts that come up. Don't think about it too hard. Just let it come up spontaneously on its own. If you happen to have a pad of paper and a pen close to you, it can be helpful to write this stuff down. If you don't, no stress. Just notice what comes up for you. All right, so what can you do with the frog? What does red taste like? What does it sound like? Feel like? What does red smell like? Which emotion is a key? Which is a hammer? A blanket? All right. So now think of a memory with a strong positive feeling. Notice the first one that comes up for you. And really get into it. Just use all of your senses. See it, hear it, smell it, feel it. So now, where do you notice the feeling most in your body? Where does it live? Which color is this feeling? What's the first one that comes up? What texture and shape does it have? Does it make a sound? And now imagine that this feeling is going out of your body to face you. It becomes personified and takes on a new shape. What does it look like now? Ask it a question and see how it responds. All right. So we're going to take this and we're going to apply it to fear and bias. So I think one of the major challenges that happens when people experience altered states is that the people around them might feel fear or uncertainty, which is totally natural. And I think it often happens because we fear the unknown. That's a instinct that all of us have that helped us survive as a species. But when something is really radically different, and someone is experiencing this new state, our fear can also influence their emotions, and they might become more fearful. And if they're already in a fear state because of this, because for them, it's also the unknown. If someone has been thrown into a new perspective or different reality, then the fear of unknown can take over them too and can make it really challenging. So it can be important for us to reflect on our own fear and notice if it's coming up. And if it is, here's one way that you can work through it. And it doesn't necessarily bring any shoulds or should nots. It mostly explores the raw experience itself to understand what's behind it and then to create a new resource to respond. So this comes from a training that I did earlier this year called Core Transformation. And I'll reference this at the end too. But I would not recommend doing this process with someone unless you've had the training. But the idea itself of asking these types of questions to explore something and to consider that even something that's really terrifying can have a positive intention for us. I think those are two key concepts that you can bring and use to support other people. So first, notice something that makes you feel afraid. You don't necessarily have to use fear in this. You can use really anything that's stressing you out just to understand the process. But I think if you have a fear, even specifically fear of the unknown that is really strong for you, you can bring that up now and just notice it. And you can think of a memory where this fear came up, perhaps recently or a time that stands out to you. And when you notice this fear, observe where the fear feels in your body. Observe where it seems to live. And when you've noticed that, take a moment to consider that this fear may have a positive intention for you. Maybe it's trying to protect you, maybe it's trying to do something good for you. And even having that maybe, see if you can thank it. Yeah, and just appreciating it for being there. And now ask this fear, noticing the very first thing that comes up. What does it want? What does it really want? You may get a thought, word, image, maybe even a symbol. Go with the first thing, and when you get that, invite it to step or breathe into that experience as if it's already happening right here, right now, fully and completely. Invite it to show you what it would be like to have that experience. And trust that it will do it. You don't have to force it. Just breathing into that. And it's okay to feel like you're just guessing this. So now, talk to this part again and say, now that you feel this, what do you want through this experience that's even deeper or more important? Notice the first thing that comes up. And when you get a response, thank it for sharing that. And thank it for wanting this for you. And now invite it to step or breathe fully and completely into that experience, as if it's already happening here and now. And just ease into that very naturally. So this may feel a little repetitive, but we're just going to keep peeling back the layers and noticing if there is anything there. You can talk to it and say, in experiencing this feeling, what do you want that's even deeper, even more important? And just notice the first thing that comes up. And when you have that, invite it to step or breathe into that fully and completely. Since we're doing this with a large group, just go at your own pace. Go with your own experience. But I invite you to ask these questions at least a few more times, maybe, to see, asking it, when you have this experience, what do you want that's even deeper or more important? And then when you get the response, inviting this part of you to step or breathe into that. And just keep going until you reach the point where you can't go any further, where there is no further. And from that space, again, invite it to step into this experience fully and completely, allowing yourself to immerse yourself in that. And from that space, ask in a general way, if I were to experience this ongoing, how would it change my life? notice the first things that come up for that from this new experience, this new vantage point. And then consider how this new vantage point would change or impact each of the experiences down this ladder. All the responses this part gave you. How now your view of them has shifted until you get all the way back to the original feeling. Perhaps it was fear, perhaps it was a different emotion. And notice how this new experience changes that original one. And then just breathe this in even deeper, this new feeling, allowing it to expand through your body. And take a moment to consider that your own state, your emotional state, your mental state, has an impact on people around you. That whether consciously or not, they can feel it, they can sense it. And if they're in an altered state, they may feel and sense your state even more strongly. And that when you come from a positive place, it offers a positive experience for them. All right, so we have a few minutes left. I'm going to try to wrap this up, but I do want to take at least a couple questions before we end, but I'll just speed through these last few slides. So lens of potential, that's essentially bringing all this together. But one thing I would like to add with this is when you're meeting with someone, sometimes it can be helpful to see their positive potential in that moment, even if the way that they're presenting themselves maybe seems to be fearful or frustrated, if they don't seem to be happy in that moment. You can imagine in your mind's eye, what would this person look like if they were thriving, if they were just joyful, doing what they wanted to do? And just using your imagination to come up with some things in order to generate the feeling. The feeling is the important part. And consider how would they feel and how would you feel if you saw them in this empowered experience. And then you can just hold that feeling for them. And it may or may not impact them right away, but it offers that even without saying anything, just having that state, it offers something for them to pick up on. And consider if you are coming from a fearful, stressed, emotional state when they're already stressed and fearful, consider, would that help them or would that make them more fearful? So I won't get into specifically these scenarios, but that summarizes it. So integration, this is an important piece, and it's talked about a lot in the psychedelic community, but it's not talked about really at all in mental health, at least for people who have altered states. The idea of integration is it typically happens after an altered state. Doesn't necessarily have to, but that's common. It incorporates the experience and it provides some key changes for that person's life in light of everything that they've learned from that. And sometimes it also is a part of processing trauma. And so for integration, some things you can do is just ask them, like, what do they want to take from this experience? Like, how do they want to change their life? Or what do they want to be different. Some resources you can give them, meetup.com, Hearing Voices Network, and maybe help them find a cultural or spiritual group that they align with. You can support them in some integration practices, things that interest them: art, music, dance, writing, tinkering, nature, meditation, bodywork, yoga, psychotherapy, and shamanic support. And sometimes they might end up reorganizing their life, like their job, home environment, social circle, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, partnership, marriage, hobbies. And so that was just kind of a review. I did want to show this. I did want to show this last video. Actually, we're coming close to time. I'll share some additional resources for further education. So the Center for Spiritual Emergence. So they actually have a couple of training programs. They have one for clinicians and healthcare professionals, and they have another for peer supporters. Both of those trainings help you learn more about spiritual emergence and how to support people through that. Andreas NLP, that's what I referenced earlier with core transformation. That was the fear exercise that we went through, but it goes a lot more in depth into a few different modalities. Neurodynamic breathwork, that's an online program that's, they have several meetings a week where you can actually do breathwork with other people. It's $50 a month, I think. They have some lower tiered resources too that are cheaper. Hearing Voices Network, National Paranoia Network, that's UK based, but they offer a lot of trainings. And the opendoorway.org, which is so far the only resource I've found that's free. It's 3 times a week, and it's lots of Q&A for, it's someone who's had lived experience with going through an altered state, and you might say coming out of it from a more empowered place. And there's a ton of Q&A where you can get a lot of support there. And it's non-religious, non-dogmatic. We are at time, but I would be happy to answer any questions, or if anyone has any comments they want to make.
Andrew, there is a question in regards to the slideshow. Will it be available to everyone today?
I can totally email that to people if they want. There's going to be a follow-up survey that comes after this, and at the end it'll ask for your email. If you want to provide that, I'd be happy to send the slides. So I see Kevin Fitz raising his hand.
Yeah, Andrew, just had a comment and then a question. One is terrific job. Just the pace, the presentation, the information, your PowerPoints, just what an excellent workshop. I thought it was great. And I really appreciate the depth of the subject matter, and that your calm, sort of sensitive way of presenting it, I just thought was excellent. So kudos to you for this great job. And then my question is, how, when you just have sort of a tabletop conversation with people, how do you keep them out of dismissing this as woo-woo or new age or not applicable to most of the people who have been pathologized or diagnosed? And because a lot of people seem to have great conflicts with, these are the people with serious and persistent mental illness, so this could not be a benefit to them. And and I just wonder how you would navigate something like that when people criticize this as being, outside mainstream allopathic services and stuff. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Kevin. That's a really excellent question. I'm still actually learning that. So far, where I'm coming from with that is, I would probably reference at least some research, like research with Lauren Mosher with Soteria House. I'd reference Open Dialogue with Jocko Sekula, who works with a lot of people who have a psychotic diagnosis, but only 1/3 of them ever use medication long-term. I would reference a lot of these different researchers. I'd reference Stanislav Grof and say, this is a topic that there is research, but it also needs more research, and we shouldn't necessarily come to the conclusion that these people are pathological. There's a lot we don't understand about mental health in general. And I would hope that anyone who works in this field would have the humility to be open to new perspectives.
Yeah, very good. This comes up. I'm pushing an initiative in the state of Oregon called Peer Respite, and I keep running into these people who say you're criticizing the medical model, and this is way out in left field. And so, anyway, so great work. I'm very encouraged by this. Thank you.
Awesome, Kim. Yeah, I would love to follow up with you about that actually, outside this.
Yes, great. Will do. Thanks.
So, Jacqueline, do you think we could take a few more questions?
Yeah, and then would you like to open up the poll? Send out the link to that?
Yeah, totally. So maybe we can send that out right now as I'm asking some questions too.
Yeah, go. Do you have the link to that?
Yeah, let me see. Okay, so I'm gonna post a poll here and feel free to fill that out if you want to. And if you want any other updates, there is actually an extended workshop that I'm doing that's in the works. So if you want to have any updates about that, feel free to put your email in. All right, so. And I'm sorry, there are a lot of comments. If you have a question that you want answered, probably the best way is just to raise your hand, or feel free to just even speak up. Because I think we only have time for maybe 2 questions. Or if anyone has any comments. Awesome, thank you, Jim. We'll try to get that. If you could fill out the feedback form too, it'll just be easier for me to keep track of. Jacqueline, do we have access to the chat content after the workshop? Or does that go away?
Yeah, we should be able to.
Oh, okay, perfect. Okay.
I wanted to know where you find the form, because I don't see it anywhere.
So I posted a link, and it's called Pegram, an.adaform.com.
Good for you. I don't see it anywhere. So
Okay, it's in the chat. Are you able to see the chat?
Well, yeah, and the chat is totally blank as far as I can see.
Oh, weird.
Yeah. I mean, I could put something in there, but I don't know what it's going to do.
Kimberly, if you want, you can post your email in the chat.
Now I got lost.
Okay. I can follow up with you about that because I already have your contact info, so we can touch base about that if you want.
Thank you. It was a very good class and I appreciated it.
Thank you. All right. If anyone doesn't have any questions, I think we might wrap up here.
Awesome. Thanks again, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I was not expecting like 70 plus people. I was expecting maybe 20.
Good job, Andrew. Have a good day, man.
Thank you. You too. All right. Well,
fantastic.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for the comments in the chat too. All right. Take care.
Great job, Andrew.
Appreciate it.
Oh, really? I would think so. Well, it seems like it goes right to, I don't know if that's an MHAO survey or if that was his survey. Anyway, I gave him high marks. Does Andrew have a website address or an email address that you could put in the chat for us?
Yeah, Kevin, I'll post it right now.
Thank you.
That's a good question.
Was that your personal like survey, or was that for MacBo or for Peer Apocalypse?
That's my personal one.
Okay. Are there Peer Apocalypse surveys that we're supposed to do also?
So I heard that they are not doing them now.
I'm getting conflicting reports, but if they do, they will be sent at the end of the day today via email.
Okay. Because I thought I saw it on the website to make sure that we did them also.
Yeah, I think there'll be a blast email sent out this evening.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Oh, looks like there's a survey that won't send. I can double check that and see if there's any technical issues. Maybe I can refresh it. If not, if it doesn't work, it sounds like there might be another survey from Peer Apocalypse. So either way, I think it should work out. But I will double check it and I'll see if there's anything I can fix about it. Is anyone else having any issues with the survey? Has anyone tried?
Yeah, I tried to send the survey also, and it just was saying there was a network error to refresh, and then kept refreshing the same error. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, let me see if I can fix that.
Looks like some people went through wondering if I just have too secure of a network.
I just confirmed, so there will be an email blast out to everyone, all the participants, at the end of the day, to do a survey on your presentation.
Perfect. Awesome. So guys, if the survey I sent doesn't work, feel free to just do the other one.